Hello everyone and welcome to our module on sulfonamides. Shown on the screen is the general structure of a sulfonamide antibiotic, and they're called sulfonamides because these antibiotics contain a sulfonamide group, which is an SO2 bonded to a nitrogen. And we often say that a certain type of drug is a sulfa drug, and when we say this, we mean it contains a sulfonamide group like this one I've circled on the screen. Sulfonamide antibiotics are sulfa drugs, but as we will see in this video, there are a number of non-antibiotic drugs that also contain a sulfonamide group. In order to understand how sulfonamide drugs work as antibiotics, we need to review a few details about the vitamin folate and how bacteria synthesize this vitamin. So in the biochemistry section, I talked about the vitamin folate and how it was important for synthesis of the nucleotide thymidine and in general for DNA synthesis. If you look at the bottom of the screen, I've shown a reaction that occurs in bacterial cells and also in human cells, where uridine is converted by thymidylate synthase into thymidine, and thymidine is necessary to synthesize DNA. In order for thymidylate synthase to function properly, it needs tetrahydrofolate, which comes from the vitamin folate. Now, mammalian cells, like human cells, are advanced, and they can transport folate across their cell membranes. This makes them able to use exogenous folate that come from outside the cell, including from the diet, and that's where humans get their folate from the diet. Bacterial cells, however, cannot take up exogenous folate, so they have to synthesize it themselves. This creates a target for antibiotics because if folate synthesis in bacteria can be inhibited, only the bacterial cells will be affected. The human cells will continue to pick up folate from outside the cell membrane. The first step in bacterial folate synthesis involves a molecule called para-aminobenzoic acid, or PABA. PABA is combined with another structure called pteridine by an enzyme called dihydroterorate synthase. This leads to the creation of a structure called dihydroteroic acid, which will later become folate. And you can see that the PABA structure is here. It's been attached to the pteridine structure here to create dihydroteroic acid. And sulfonamide antibiotics inhibit this step in folate synthesis. They inhibit the enzyme dihydroterorate synthase. Once dihydroteroic acid has been formed, it's converted into dihydrofolic acid by bacteria and ultimately to tetrahydrofolate, which is the form of folate that is necessary for DNA synthesis. The enzyme that catalyzes this last step is called dihydrofolate reductase, and that enzyme is inhibited by two antibiotics called trimethoprim and pyrimethamine, which we'll also talk about in this module. They're often given together with a sulfonamide antibiotic for sequential block of the folate synthesis pathway in bacteria. And here I've summarized the entire pathway for you to make this very clear in your mind. Bacterial folate synthesis begins with PABA and pteridine, which are combined by dihydroterorate synthase to form dihydroteroic acid. This is converted into dihydrofolic acid, and then dihydrofolate reductase converts that into tetrahydrofolate, which is important for DNA synthesis. Sulfonamide antibiotics inhibit dihydroteroate synthase, and trimethoprim and pyrimethamine inhibit dihydrofolate reductase. And as we'll see in a few slides, these drugs are often given together for sequential block of this pathway. Antibiotics in the sulfonamide class include sulfamethoxazole, which is often abbreviated SMX, also sulfasoxazole and sulfadiazine. I've shown their chemical structures on the screen here, and you can see that they all share similarities with PABA. They all have a benzene ring attached to a nitrogen group, and for this reason, they are mimics of PABA, and they will competitively inhibit dihydroteroate synthase, as we talked about in the last few slides. Once you understand this mechanism of action, it's very easy to remember the mechanisms by which bacteria become resistant to sulfonamide antibiotics. They can increase the amount of PABA inside the cell because PABA competes with the sulfonamide antibiotic for the enzyme dihydroteroate synthase. They can also alter the enzyme dihydroteroate synthase so that it no longer recognizes the antibiotic structure. And then finally, some bacteria modify their uptake of the antibiotic drug. There is another drug that works very similar to sulfonamide antibiotics, but it is not a sulfonamide, and it's called dapsone. You can see that it has an SO2, but it is not bonded to a nitrogen group. Therefore, this structure is not a sulfonamide structure. However, dapsone also competes with PABA for the enzyme dihydroteroate synthase, and it is sometimes used in certain special infections. Its two main uses are to treat Mycobacterium leprae, which causes leprosy, and it's also used in the treatment of Pneumocystis jirovecii in patients with HIV/AIDS. Back to our discussion of sulfonamide antibiotics, let's talk about some of the clinical scenarios where you might use these drugs. The most common place where you'll see sulfonamides used is together with trimethoprim. The antibiotic Bactrim is a combination of trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole. It's often abbreviated TMP-SMX. And as I mentioned before, when you use sulfamethoxazole together with trimethoprim, that results in sequential and very effective block of tetrahydrofolate synthesis in bacteria. Sulfadiazine is sometimes given as a silver sulfadiazine cream for burn patients, and sulfadiazine is given together with pyrimethamine also for sequential block of tetrahydrofolate synthesis. This combination is often used to treat toxoplasmosis in patients who have HIV infection. Now let's talk about the toxicity of sulfonamide antibiotics. The major problem with this class of drugs is that a significant number of patients develop a hypersensitivity or allergic reaction. This occurs in about 3% of patients. Let's look at the chemical structure of sulfamethoxazole that I've shown at the bottom of the screen. This benzene ring has carbons which are numbered, and this is the 1 carbon and this is the 4 carbon. Notice that there is an NH2 group attached to the 4 carbon. This is called the N4 nitrogen. This is present in all sulfonamide antibiotics. Attached to the 1 carbon there is a nitrogen that's part of the sulfonamide group. This is called the N1 nitrogen. In sulfonamide antibiotics, the N1 nitrogen is attached to a ring that contains nitrogen. It is believed to be the presence of this NH2 group here and this nitrogen-containing ring that are immunogenic and that are responsible for most of the allergic reactions. So you'll read in your textbooks that allergic reactions to sulfonamides are linked to an arylamine or an NH2 group at the N4 position and a nitrogen ring attached to the N1 nitrogen. Only sulfonamide antibiotics contain both of these features, so as we'll see on the next slide, there are many other sulfa drugs that are sulfonamides, but they much less frequently cause allergic reactions compared with sulfonamide antibiotics, and that's because only sulfonamide antibiotics have these two portions of their chemical structure present. Shown on the screen here are a number of other sulfa drugs. For example, furosemide, a loop diuretic, contains a sulfur moiety, so it is a sulfur drug. So is probenecid, which is used for gout. So is hydrochlorothiazide, a thiazide diuretic. The same is true of acetazolamide, which is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Also sulfasalazine, used for inflammatory bowel disease, and also sulfonylurea drugs used for diabetes. All of these drugs contain a sulfonamide moiety, so they are sulfa drugs. However, none of them contain both of those features I reviewed on the last slide that are present in sulfonamide antibiotics. For this reason, these drugs much less frequently cause allergic reactions compared with sulfonamide antibiotics. So what are the specific hypersensitivity reactions that can be seen among patients who are allergic to sulfa drugs? Well, they are the same as the hypersensitivity reactions that occur among patients who are allergic to penicillin, and I discuss all of these in detail in the video on penicillins. These reactions include anaphylaxis, a maculopapular rash, serum sickness, interstitial nephritis in the kidneys, and finally Stevens-Johnson syndrome and toxic epidermal necrolysis. And I've highlighted these last two hypersensitivity reactions because these are life-threatening skin reactions and they are commonly seen among patients who are allergic to sulfonamide antibiotics. Another skin toxicity that can occur is photosensitivity. This is a drug interaction with UV light. It's not an allergic reaction. It's caused by many drugs, but sulfonamides are a commonly associated drug with photosensitivity. This also commonly occurs in patients who take tetracycline or amiodarone, and patients on these drugs often need to be told to avoid the sun because if they go out in the sun, they will easily sunburn and sometimes even blister. That's the photosensitivity that results from being on the drug. Sulfonamides are a classic trigger for hemolysis in patients who are deficient in the enzyme glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. I discussed this enzyme in detail in the biochemistry section. Patients with this enzyme deficiency have red cells that are susceptible to oxidative stress, and sulfonamides are oxidants, therefore they are a classic trigger for hemolysis in this condition. Also a classic trigger is the antibiotic dapsone that I talked about earlier. Sulfonamides are able to bind extensively to albumin. This means they can potentially displace other bound substances including bilirubin and warfarin, and this leads to some of the other toxicities of these antibiotics. One of those toxicities is kernicterus, which is a syndrome that occurs in infants with high bilirubin levels. Sulfonamides can displace bilirubin from albumin and increase the free bilirubin levels, and unconjugated bilirubin is a neurotoxin to babies. In particular, it's toxic to the basal ganglia and the brainstem nuclei. So children who develop kernicterus for any reason, including due to the administration of sulfonamide antibiotics, can develop permanent neurologic impairment. It's often a movement disorder with symptoms like chorea and tremor. In addition, there can be hearing loss and limited gaze. This is a very serious consequence of high bilirubin levels in babies, and this is one of the reasons that sulfonamide antibiotics are avoided in pregnant women and young children. Also, because sulfonamide antibiotics bind extensively to albumin, they can potentially displace warfarin from albumin, and this can raise the warfarin levels. This means that in patients on chronic warfarin therapy, the INR level may rise if they take a sulfonamide antibiotic. Now, any antibiotic can potentially increase the INR in a patient on chronic warfarin therapy. That's because antibiotics disrupt the GI bacteria that produce some of the vitamin K our body uses. However, a second mechanism for raising the INR exists for sulfonamide antibiotics, and that is because they bind to albumin. Now let's talk about the two antibiotics that inhibit the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase in the bacterial folate synthesis pathway. The two antibiotics that do this are trimethoprim and pyrimethamine. You can see that they both have a nitrogen-containing ring similar to the nitrogen-containing ring in dihydrofolic acid. This means that they will mimic the structure of dihydrofolate and inhibit the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. The toxicity of these two antibiotics occurs because although they preferentially inhibit the bacterial dihydrofolate reductase enzyme, some inhibition of the human version of this enzyme also occurs. This will inhibit the folate pathway in human cells, and this will inhibit DNA synthesis of rapidly divided human cells, and that means it will greatly affect the bone marrow. So cells in the bone marrow are rapidly dividing cells, and if DNA synthesis is disrupted, this will lead to bone marrow suppression. So you can potentially see in patients taking trimethoprim or pyrimethamine pancytopenia, including a megaloblastic anemia, leukopenia, and low platelets. This all results from inhibition of DNA synthesis in the bone marrow. You can alleviate this by administering something called leucovorin, which is folinic acid. This is converted to tetrahydrofolate but does not require the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. This is called the leucovorin rescue, which is sometimes used in patients receiving the chemotherapy agent methotrexate. You can also use it in patients who develop bone marrow suppression on trimethoprim or pyrimethamine. To make this more clear, let me show you what the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase does in human cells. Folate from our diet is converted into dihydrofolate, and then dihydrofolate reductase converts dihydrofolate into tetrahydrofolate in human cells, just as it does in bacterial cells. Tetrahydrofolate is then used to convert uridine into thymidine, which is necessary for DNA synthesis. So if dihydrofolate reductase is inhibited by trimethoprim or pyrimethamine, this disrupts the folate pathway, and thymidine can't be synthesized, and therefore DNA synthesis in human cells is disrupted. That leads to bone marrow suppression. Leucovorin can be converted into tetrahydrofolate and does not require the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. Therefore, it rescues the folate pathway and allows thymidine synthesis to begin again. As I mentioned before, trimethoprim is often given together with sulfamethoxazole in the drug Bactrim, which is abbreviated TMP-SMX. This combination is bactericidal, even though the individual components, trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole, are bacteriostatic by themselves. Bactrim covers many gram-positive and gram-negative infections, although importantly it does not cover the serious gram-negative infection Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It also does not cover Bacteroides fragilis and most other anaerobes. In addition, it can be used to treat some types of fungi and parasites. Common clinical uses of Bactrim include urinary tract infections. That's because it generally covers E. coli well. In addition, it's often used to treat pneumocystis pneumonia in patients with HIV. It's highly effective against this yeast, and therefore it's useful for both treatment and prophylaxis. Bactrim is not given during pregnancy for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned before, there's a risk of kernicterus in the baby from the sulfonamide component. In addition, the trimethoprim component can disrupt folic acid metabolism, and folic acid is very important in pregnant women to avoid neural tube defects in the baby. Let me finish with this slide on pneumocystis pneumonia, which is caused by the fungus Pneumocystis jirovecii. This is an opportunistic fungal infection that causes pneumonia. It occurs in end-stage HIV and AIDS, and I talk about this in detail in other videos. But what I want to point out here is that the treatment of choice is Bactrim. However, unfortunately, for reasons that are poorly understood, hypersensitivity reactions are much more common in patients with HIV compared to the general population. They are 6 to 25 times higher in patients who have HIV. For this reason, many patients with HIV who have pneumocystis pneumonia cannot tolerate Bactrim, and alternative therapies have to be used. These drugs include dapsone, which I talked about in this module, also pentamidine, and also atovaquone, which is a malaria drug. So you'll read about these drugs being used for pneumocystis pneumonia, and you'll wonder why there are so many different treatments for pneumocystis pneumonia, and part of the reason is because so many patients with HIV have hypersensitivity reactions to Bactrim. And that concludes our module on sulfonamide antibiotics.